So as you can see, I've put a line of black at the top of this eye here. I'm going to show you how to do that using the other eye. So I'm going to line up my two eyes and decide where I want to start my black line. And I'm going to insert my hook into the back loop of that stitch where I want to start, and I'm going to pull up a loop of black, and then I'm going to chain one. And now in those back loops of the other stitches, I'm going to insert my hook into these back loops here, and I'm going to slip stitch. And I'm going to want to have a total of 8 because that's how many I did on the other side. And my first chain counted as 1 slip stitch. So I'm going to go on until I have a total of 8 slip stitches going across the top of this part of the eye. Okay, so I have done my 8 slip stitches, and now I'm going to cut off my yarn. And then I'm going to pull that tail toward the back of the work. And now the eye is finished. So now I'm going to continue with the next part. I'm going to single crochet until I get to the front of the face. So I'm going to remove my stitch marker and do my first stitch of the row and put my stitch marker back. And then I'm going to single crochet until I get to the front of the face where I'm going to add the eyes. Okay, I've gotten to the front of the face. I've gotten to the stitches right before where I sewed the nose on. So I'm going to go into that stitch where I sewed on the nose. As you can see, there's still the chains visible from where I chained. So I'm going to go into each one of those chains and I'm going to single crochet. But I'm going to first pull up a loop and I'm going to leave that stitch open. And then I'm going to use a stitch to pull through and finish the stitch, but I'm also going to pull it through the bottom of the eye so that it can attach the eye without having to sew it on. So I'm going to finish that stitch by pulling up a loop through the gray stitch at the bottom of the eye, and then I'm going to pull that loop through to finish my single crochet. And I'm going to do that again in the next stitch. So I'm going to go into that next single crochet, into that next chain and single crochet. So I'm going to pull up a loop under that chain, and then I'm going to use another loop that I'm going to pull through the bottom of the eye to finish the stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook into the bottom of the eye, and then I'm going to pull a loop through the bottom of the eye, and I'm going to use that loop to finish my stitch. And now as you can see, the bottom of the eye is attached. So now I'm going to do the next one. So I'm going to pull up a loop and single crochet once between the two eyes. And now I'm going to go into the next stitch and single crochet, but leave it open. And once again, I'm going to pull a loop through the bottom of the other eye at about the same spot that I did the second stitch that I pulled through the first eye. So I'm going to go into about the middle, and I'm going to finish my stitch with that loop that I pulled through. And then I'm going to do the next stitch the same way and pull up a loop at that chain. And then I'm going to use a loop from pulling through the gray part to finish that stitch. And now both of the eyes are attached, so I'm just going to continue to single crochet along the other side. And I'm going to come back later and I'm going to sew closed that hole in the middle of the eyes. So now I'm going to continue to single crochet on this side of the face. So I've gotten back to my stitch marker. So I'm going to single crochet once again. I'm going to remove my stitch marker and do the first stitch of my row. And then I'm going to single crochet until I get to the front of the face. And this time I'm going to crochet around the tops of the eyes so that I can finish attaching them. Okay, so I've gotten to the stitches before the eyes, so I'm once again going to finish my stitch by pulling a loop through the bottom of the gray part. So I'm going to pull a loop through that and I'm going to finish my stitch with it. And now I'm going to turn the work slightly and I'm going to single crochet into those back loops of the gray part. And I'm going to single crochet around both eyes. So I've gotten to the middle of the eyes and now I'm going to get on to the next one. So I'm going to do one more stitch here. And once again, I'm going to leave that stitch open. And then I'm going to pull a loop through about the same spot on the other eye. And I'm going to use that loop to finish this stitch. So I'm going to go into around the same spot and pull up a loop. And then I'm going to use that loop to finish that stitch. And now I'm going to turn the work slightly and start to crochet into the back loops of the gray part of the opposite eye. And when I get to the other side, I'm going to do the same thing I did on this side that I did to attach the bottom corner of the eye. So I've gotten to that bottom corner of the eye and now I'm going to attach it. And I've got my stitch open so that I can pull through a loop at the bottom to finish that stitch. So I'm going to go into that white part and pull up a loop. And now I'm going to pull that loop through the remaining two. Okay, and now I'm going to turn the work slightly and I'm going to continue to single crochet on this other side. So I've gotten to the end of my row. I'm going to remove my stitch marker. And now in this row, I'm going to decrease the stitches right before the eyes on both sides. So I'm going to continue single crocheting until I get to the stitches right before the eyes. So I have gotten to the stitch right before my decrease. I'm going to do my last single crochet before my decrease. And now I'm going to pull up a loop in this stitch and then pull up another loop in the next one, the one around the eye. And then I'm going to decrease. And now I'm going to single crochet until I get to the other side of the opposite eye so that I can do another decrease. So I've gotten to that opposite side of the eye, so I'm going to do another decrease. And then I'm going to single crochet until I get back to my stitch marker. So I have gotten back to my stitch marker. I'm going to remove it for a moment and do my first stitch of the row. And then I'm going to put my stitch marker back. And now in this row, I'm going to decrease the corners of the eyes, and then once I get to the spot where the eyebrows are going to be, I'm going to crochet only in those back loops and leave the front loops open so that I can come back and crochet the eyebrows on later. So I'm just going to single crochet until I get to before the eyes. So I have gotten to the stitches before the eyes, and now I'm going to do a decrease, and this time I'm going to decrease by 3. So I'm going to pull up a loop in the next, and then pull up one more loop in the next one, and then I'm going to crochet all of those loops together. And then I'm going to single crochet one more time. And now in the next 6 stitches, I'm going to only single crochet into the back loops and leave the front loops open so that I can crochet on the eyebrows later. So this loop I'm going to leave open to the front, and I'm going to crochet into that back loop. And I'm going to do this for 6 more stitches. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, and one more. So I have all of those loops showing, so I can put the eyebrow on these loops later. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. First I'm going to go into both loops for 1 stitch so that I can have a spot that is between the 2 brows. And then I'm going to single crochet into those back loops for 6 more stitches. So now I have the loops for both of the brows open, and now I'm just going to do my decrease on the other side. And now I'm going to crochet all of those together. And now I'm just going to continue to single crochet until I get to my stitch marker. So I have gotten to my stitch marker again, and now I'm going to pull my loop open so that I can sew closed this really big hole in the middle of the 2 eyes. I have some of my charcoal gray yarn on my needle, and I'm going to use that to just sew across and cover up that hole. So I've finished with sewing closed that hole in the middle of the 2 eyes. As you can see, I've covered it up with my gray yarn. So now I am just going to add some fiber fill to the top of the head. Next, I'm going to use my brown yarn, the same yarn that I used to make the arms. I'm going to use that brown yarn, and I'm going to do a row of slip stitches onto each of the loops that I left out of the last row so that I can make the brows. So I'm going to go into those loops that I left open, and I'm going to insert my hook, and I'm going to leave a long tail at each side so that I can use that tail later to add the twigs coming out of the back of the head. So I'm going to pull up a loop, and then I'm going to chain one, and then I'm going to go into each of those loops that I left from the previous row, and I'm going to slip stitch until I get to the last one. There should be 6 in total. And now I'm just going to do the last one, and I'm going to cut off a very long tail once again so that I can use this part to make one of the twigs at the back of the head later. And I'm going to pull that tail toward the back of the work so that it's not showing from the outside. And I'm going to pull the one that I started with to the back as well. And now I have one of the brows, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other one. So I've inserted my hook into the first loop of the other brow, and I'm going to once again leave a long tail. And then I'm going to chain one. And just like I did in the other side, I'm going to slip stitch into the remaining loops that I left outside from the previous row. And now once again, I'm going to cut off a really long tail so that I can use those tails later. And I'm going to pull those tails to the back of the work. Now that I've done with the brows, I'm going to start to make the twigs at the back of the head. So I'm going to make a slip knot with one of my tails, and I'm going to put it as close to the bottom as I possibly can so that you have as much of your tail as possible to work with. So I'm going to insert my hook into that slip knot, and then I'm going to chain 8. So I'm going to chain 8. Okay, and now in the third chain from my hook, I'm going to insert my hook, and I'm going to pull up a loop and slip stitch. Okay, and now I'm going to slip stitch into the next 2 chains. And now I'm going to chain 2. And now into that third chain from my hook, I'm going to insert my hook again, and I'm going to slip stitch. And now I'm going to slip stitch into the remaining stitches on my chain until I get back to the bottom. And now I'm just going to pull my yarn through, and I have finished one of my twigs. And as you can see, I've actually done 2 of them. So I'm just going to do one more. And now I've finished with all 3 of my twigs, and I'm using the fourth tail to sew all of the bottoms of the twigs together. Okay, and now I am going to continue at the back of the head. First, I'm going to remove my stitch marker, and then I'm going to do my first stitch of the row and put my stitch marker back. And then I'm going to single crochet into this row, and I'm going to decrease every 5th stitch. So in the 5th stitch, I'm going to pull up a loop, and then pull up a loop in the next, and then crochet together. And I'm going to do that every 5th stitch all the way around until I get back to my stitch marker. So I've gotten to the end of my row, I've gotten back to my stitch marker, so I'm going to remove it and do my next row. And then I'm going to put my stitch marker back. And now in this row, I'm going to decrease every 4th stitch. So in that 4th stitch, I'm going to pull up a loop in the next, and crochet together. And now I'm going to continue and decrease every 4th stitch until I get back to my stitch marker. So I've gotten back to my stitch marker. I'm going to remove it and do the first stitch of my next row. And now in this row, I'm going to decrease every 3rd stitch. So I'm going to continue to my 3rd stitch, and then I'm going to decrease. And I'm going to decrease all the way around every 3rd stitch until I get to the front of the piece, and then I'm going to crochet around the sticks that I made for the back of the head. So here I am at the front of the piece. I'm going to pull up the sticks and crochet around them. So I'm going to crochet into the next stitch. I'm going to skip one stitch, and I'm going to pull those sticks up to it. And then I'm going to crochet into the next stitch. And now I'm going to continue with my row, and I'm going to continue to decrease every 3rd stitch. So I have gotten to the end of my row again, and this time I'm going to pull open my loop, and I'm going to add more fiber fill to the head. So I finished adding some more fiber fill, so I'm going to continue with my next row. And in this row, I'm going to decrease every 2nd stitch. So I'm going to do the first stitch of my row and replace my stitch marker. And then I'm going to decrease the very next stitch. So I'm going to pull up a loop, and then pull up a loop in the next, and crochet together. And then I'm going to continue to decrease every 2nd stitch until I get back to my stitch marker. So I've gotten back to my stitch marker, and before I do my next row, I'm going to add a little bit more fiber fill just to fill this out before I close it up too much. So I've got a lot more fiber fill in there now, so I'm going to remove my stitch marker and do my next row. And in this row, I'm going to decrease every single stitch. So I'm going to decrease the very first stitch before I put my stitch marker back. So I'm going to pull up a loop in the next stitch and crochet together. And then I'm going to replace my stitch marker into that stitch that I decreased. And now I'm going to decrease every other stitch of the row. So I've gotten back to my stitch marker. I'm going to remove it. And I have one stitch left over before the end of my row, so I'm going to do just one more decrease. And crochet together. And then I'm going to slip stitch to end my row. And now I'm going to cut off a bit of a long tail so that I can sew closed that hole at the top of the head. So I'm going to sew closed this hole. I've got my tail threaded on my needle, and now I'm going to go into each stitch, and I am going to sew that hole closed. So I've finished sewing through all of those stitches. Now I'm just going to tighten my tail. And now the hole is closed, so I'm just going to sew the tail in. So I've finished sewing the tail in, and now I am going to do a row at the bottom of the mouth. So I'm going to do a row to join the blue part to the white part here. So I'm going to take my white yarn and I'm going to pull a loop through the bottom corner of the mouth. And then I'm going to pull my loop through the bottom loop of the blue part. I'm going to go through that same loop that I started stitching on the blue part on my upper jaw part. And I'm going to pull a loop through both the blue stitch and the white stitch. So I'm going to pull up a loop and chain one. And then I'm going to single crochet the next 3 stitches, and I'm going to single crochet into both the blue part and both the white part and the bottom loop of the blue part. And I'm also going to hide my tail as I go. So I'm going to leave those top loops open, and I'm going to stitch into those bottom loops. So I'm going to go into the white part first, and then I'm going to go into the blue part, into just that bottom loop. And then I'm going to single crochet. And then I'm going to go into the next stitch and do the same thing into the white part and into the blue part, and then I'm going to single crochet. And then I'm going to go into the next stitch and once again pull through both the white part and the blue part and single crochet. And now as you can see, I have joined that part of those two pieces of the mouth together. So for the next part, I'm going to start to slip stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook into, once again, into the white part and the blue part, and I'm going to pull up a loop, and then I'm going to slip stitch. And then I'm going to go into the next stitch and do another slip stitch into the white part and into that blue loop. And do another slip stitch. And then I'm going to do one more slip stitch into the next stitch. So I'm going to go in to that stitch and into the blue part. And do a slip stitch. And now I'm going to pull a really, really long tail, and I'm going to pull a tail long enough that I can sew the front part of the mouth together and then use the same tail to attach the other side, doing the same thing that I just did on this side. So I'm going to pull up a very long tail. So I have finished pulling out my tail, and now I'm going to use my tail end. I've threaded it on my needle, and I'm going to use that tail end to sew on the next few stitches to the front of the mouthpiece. And I'm going to sew slightly below the tops of the stitches. I'm going to sew the blue part to the bottom of these stitches on the inside. So I'm going to go into that blue stitch, into the blue loop. Once again, I'm only going to go into the bottom loop, and then I'm going to go into the bottom of the stitch from the white row. And I'm just going to sew through that spot. And then I'm going to go into the next blue loop. And then once again, I'm going to go into the bottom of that stitch on the white part. And then once again into the next blue loop. And then I'm going to go into the bottom of the white part again. So as you can see, I've sewn through the front of the blue part to the front of the white part. And now I'm just going to continue using my same tail, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did on the opposite side but mirrored. So I'm going to pull up a loop through that next stitch and through the blue loop at the bottom again. And then I'm going to slip stitch the next stitch. So I'm going to pull up a loop through that blue loop at the bottom and through the white part, and then I'm going to do a slip stitch. And now I'm going to do one more slip stitch. And I'm only going to go through that bottom blue loop. And then I'm going to finish this part using single crochets. So I am on that last stitch, and now I'm going to pull up a loop through those and single crochet. And now I am going to slip stitch to the corner of the mouth to end this part of the row.